Welcome. You're watching Beyond the Headline. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Imagine you're sending your kids to school on a regular day and you hear there's been a shooting spree in the classroom. One can only imagine the horror and pain as an 18-year-old walked into the Robb Elementary School and opened fire. 22 people, including 19 children aged between 7 and 10 years, were killed before the perpetrator was gunned down. An even more perverse twist to this sordid saga is the fact that it was this 18-year-old kid's birthday and he bought two guns, a handgun and a semi-automatic rifle from a store. He first shot his grandmother and then decided to wreak havoc in the school. Investigations are on into the reasons why. Now, the right to own guns is a long-standing flashpoint in American politics, and this bloody incident has brought it once again to the fore. America has the highest ratio of guns to citizens in the world. In 2017, the number of civilian-owned firearms in the U.S. was 120.5 guns per 100 residents. Let that sink in. That means more guns than people. The U.S. has 4% of the population of the world, but 40% of firearms in civilian hands. And any suggestion to reduce this easy availability of guns is seen as a clampdown of rights enshrined in the American Constitution. Now, those that support the right to own guns often argue that guns don't kill people, people kill people. But just in the last 1 month, there have been several instances that could counter this argument. Let me just take you through some of them. Just as recent as May 14th, at a supermarket in Buffalo, there was a shootout where at least 10 people from the African American community were killed, 3 were injured. On 15th of May in Laguna Woods, 1 person was killed once again at a church. In Houston on May 15th, you had 2 dead, 3 injured at a flea market after a fight broke out. In Milwaukee, May 13th, 16 wounded in a nightlife area because of guns being fired. On April 27th, in Biloxi, 4 dead after a shootout in a motel. Now, each of the reasons in these cases may be different, but one factor that binds it all together is the fact that there are too many guns in civilians' hands. It's too easy to get them. The question today is why the U.S. is unable to clamp down on this. Some of the reasons are every state has their own gun ownership law, and some states have easier laws than others. Uniform gun laws, if that's what you need to bring in, needs constitutional amendments, and everyone has to come on board. The gun lobby across states is politically influential and very, very strong. Of course, it doesn't help how easy it is to buy guns. You can buy a gun in the United States from private sellers. It requires no real background check. You can buy guns from private family, friends. It also requires no check or systems. And the fact is that the whole area, the whole system of checking backgrounds is understaffed. Incomplete time-bound checks allow buyers to purchase guns more easily. What we're trying to understand is why this obsession with guns in one of the most developed nations of the world. What is the issue? We've had statements from US President Joe Biden today urging Congress to look into the senseless violence and come together to pass stricter laws. Could that really happen? To get some perspective, I'm speaking today with Dr. John Harrison, a Homeland Security expert. Ron Avi Astor, Professor UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, is with us on the show. And I'm also speaking today with Adelle Naz, Media Fellow, Gold Institute for International Strategy. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for speaking with us on Beyond the Headline. Mr. Adelle, let me begin with your take. I'm sure there is widespread consternation and dismay in the United States to what has happened, but has it very quickly devolved into the same debate that what do we do or what do you do to really curb the access to guns?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I think that, first of all, I think that America is a very exceptional case, and that's why it's so complicated when it comes to this issue. We're reminded today of Columbine once again, and that school shooting that occurred, and these things that keep occurring over and over again, these same patterns. Of course, I do think that human beings, everyday Americans, shouldn't have access to automatic or semi-automatic weapons. I think that there's no need for it, frankly. But what needs to be addressed is going to the core of the issue. The individual who is now deceased, he's among the 22 killed, 21 innocent lives he took. Salvador Ramos, he was a very mentally disturbed individual who was bullied, and he had a lot of pain. And I think that some reports also indicated he even cut himself on his face. He was bullied because of his stutter and speech impediment. And this individual obviously was harboring a lot of anger and resentment since his elementary school, middle school days, which he clearly manifested in a horrific form that took lives. I think that we need to examine the fact that there isn't enough emphasis on mental health here in America, and also school safety. Until mental health is treated as not a privilege, but actually as a right, we're going to continue seeing these atrocities occur. If you can try to ban guns, then what's next? Banning knives, banning machetes, banning cars. The point is, someone who's mentally disturbed or mentally ill will do.
Adelle, allow me to come in. Do you think this is a mental health issue or it is a gun access issue? Because I just talked about several cases in the last month alone across the United States. Now, we'll have to go and check if each one of them had mental health issues behind them. There could be various reasons. The fact is that it's just too easy to access a gun.
So I think it's a combination of both, frankly. I think that there is no doubt that the individuals, you've laid out a lot of cases, you're absolutely right. In this case in particular, mental health definitely played a clear role in this. And I'm not certain whether there was a background check done on this individual. Of course, it would be very challenging to be able to, again, he was able to acquire the guns legally on his 18th birthday. And it would be very difficult to implement some kind of mechanism with which we can check the mental standing of every single individual that is going to apply for a gun license. And how are we to ascertain whether from the point at which that actual firearm or firearms were acquired legally and their mental health was checked, how do we know an incident didn't occur in a year from that time or 2 years from that time that may have severely impacted their mental standing?
Okay, let's put this in perspective. And Ron Avi Astor, great to have you on the show as well. So mental health issues is something that Adelle has brought up. Now, mental health issues are universal, and she's right when she says there isn't enough attention given to it. Some would argue that's a big problem in India as well. But you don't see cases of people going around shooting everyone because they have mental health issues. Here, I bring to you the question about the access of guns.
Right. I think that part of the problem that we have over the last 20 years is that the discussion is always framed as an either or. Is it guns? Is it mental health? Is it access? Is it, it's not. It's both of those things. And anybody who's been following the shooters sees a very common trend. It's not only mental health. These shooters are also suicidal. They want to be famous. They're committing, really the way we need to think about it is acts of terror. This is an act of terrorism. The entire world is covering this. I've spoken this morning to close to 40 different outlets worldwide. Everybody wants to know about this perpetrator. One of their goals, in almost all the cases that we've seen, is to put out a manifesto, to put out websites, to let people know all around so that their suicide and their homicide of soft targets, they'll be remembered forever. We know that. And actually the coverage of the media in terms of splitting it as either a mental health or only a gun issue is part of the problem here, because many of the family members, community members, people who are around these individuals have heard, have seen, and they can't differentiate because it's so polarized. Is it a gun issue? Is it a mental health issue? It's really a complex set of common variables that we see over and over. If somebody is amassing arsenals in their house, if they're obsessed with the shooters endlessly, if they're posting things, if they're telling people all around them, if they actually are suicidal and homicidal, these are the kinds of variables we need to look at together rather than simplifying it one way or the other. But to get to your original question, we would be saving a whole lot of lives if we just did common sense gun restrictions, such as background checks, as you mentioned, making sure we close all the loopholes so you can't get assault rifles, and all those other things you mentioned in your introduction, I think that would save a lot of lives. It wouldn't solve everything, as our guest just mentioned. But I think we're really polarizing the things in opposite directions when we know in these cases, these shooters are much more complex and their pattern is very common between shooting to shooting.
Dr. Harrison, you know, your point of view on this, and let me just set the context here, because this is an Indian audience that we're speaking to, and we're just trying to honestly figure out what is this obsession with guns. Sorry to put it so simply, but looking on in from the outside, we just don't get it. Why would you make it so easy for an 18-year-old to go and pick up 2 guns on his birthday and just shoot down people?
Well, I think that there's a little bit of misleading statements, and it's common across not only the international media, but the world. It is not that easy to get firearms in the United States. There are federal laws, and then there are state laws that apply as well. The state laws will vary a little bit, as you mentioned earlier, but federal law is very clear. You have to go through a licensed dealer. You have to do a background check, which he apparently did. And you know, if there was nothing that flagged up, there's no reason to prevent him from purchasing weapons. It's the issue is not about self-defense. And I mean, I know it sounds a little odd, but the Second Amendment was there, and the people have that right because there's a fear of authoritarian government. And the founders made that point very clear. They figured the ultimate defense of not only the individual states against an oppressive federal government, but also the people against government at any level that would become oppressive, is the ability to have that right to self-defense. Now, of course, it has been regulated over the years. You can't get automatic weapons. You can't buy weapons if you're under the age of 18. It's some states it varies a little bit with hunting rifles, for example. But the idea here is that it's not this that you can walk into any store in the country, put down your money, and walk out with a weapon. That's not just. So
okay, let's clear that up. That's an important point. So what exactly happens in this background check?
What they're looking for is a number of things, including criminal background checks. Your 2 previous guests have mentioned. They're looking for mental health records, too. And if there are a few other things, there's some misdemeanors, some lower level crimes that if you've committed or at least been in a process of being committed or being accused of, I should say, that you're banned. And also if you're a convicted felon. So there are limitations. And if you don't fit into those categories, there is no reason that the state would have to say that you can't have a weapon. Now, I would agree with your guest that where the gaps are is that what mental health records does the government have available, and it's certainly a clear discussion that could be had. And how long are the records kept? And there's some other things that we can do, but the usual debate is, as your previous guests have mentioned, that it becomes almost ritualized. That we have to do something, so we have to take away people's rights. We have to do things like that, or it goes the other way, that we can't have any sort of regulation. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right way to do it. And that to say that there's no regulation, I think, is very misleading. And you have to sort of understand the background of the Constitution, and the Constitution.
I will come to that. I will come to that because we need to understand the cultural context about why Americans feel the need to handle guns. But I just want to go through what it takes, for example, to obtain a gun license in India. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but just about how difficult it is. So if you want to do this in India, first you go to the district superintendent of police in the state that you reside. After that, the police checks if there are past records of any criminal activity. They come and check your address at your home. Then a lot of information is gathered about you. The DCP of the area does an interview with you to determine whether you're mentally or physically ill. Then you have to explain on record what is the threat that you face. And after that, a report goes to the criminal branch and the National Crime Records Bureau. Now, some may argue this is terribly bureaucratic, and a lot of things in India are. But in this case, I'm just trying to understand if it's better off, if you're better off making people who want to buy guns jump through a few loops. Let them jump through a few loops so that you can determine whether they actually need it, or if someone is trying to just express their pent-up frustrations in this macabre way? Dr. Harrison.
Well, what you have said is there are restrictions on the U.S. You do have to go through the process. The process that you've described in India is done at a state level. Some states in the United States require you to do that too. In fact, I'm from Connecticut, and even if you are, for instance, a private security officer who are armed, you not only have to go through training and a background check, but you're also required to report to the police in every community that you have a weapon. So there are, at state levels, there are some variations, but the fundamental difference is that from the very founding of the nation, that there is a belief that the public has the right to defend itself from enemies wherever they come. And when you start from that premise, then it becomes a debate. And yes, I agree. It is horrible to have this debate now. I don't think any of us, and I hope none of us.
No, but the point is you have to have it now, because this is an example of how wrong things can go. Before we move ahead, I just want to play out a clip of what U.S. President Joe Biden said on this.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage. These kinds of mass shootings rarely happen anywhere else in the world. Why? Where in God's name is our backbone to have the courage to deal with it and stand up to the lobbies? It's time to turn this pain into action for every parent, for every citizen in this country. We have to make it clear to every elected official in this country, it's time to act.
So I want to understand, Ron, that why does the U.S. president have to exhort everyone to find a backbone? I mean, isn't he the guy who has to fix things? I'm asking this very simply because I think our viewers need to understand what really is the issue.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I agree with Joe Biden. I think there's a lot more he could do. I think there's a lot more that could be done at the local and state level, too. It's not just all hanging on the Constitution. But it's not like we didn't have the Brady Bill before, which, banned all sorts of different weapons. It's not like we don't have, as our guests have talked about, laws in different states that do restrict more. The question is, why is it being framed in a constitutional realm when we know that it's possible to actually do better background checks, to not only put it in terms of mental health, but in terms of the variables that we looked at? In other words, if somebody is planning to kill other people and they post that on the web in terms of groups, doesn't have to be an individual, they have plans, they have arsenals. The question is, why can't we restrict assault weapons and warlike weapons in our country? And I don't think there's a good reason that we can't. The vast majority of Americans actually support these kinds of common sense gun restrictions. And it's not really clear to me why both Democratic and Republican senators and Congressfolk don't support these kinds of common sense laws, some of them that we've had before and that exist in other states, as our guest mentioned. So we have a big question mark on why they're not asking. So that's why the president is going out and trying to build public support so that the politicians in Congress in particular, but also at the state level, will actually feel the pressure of the voters. Unfortunately, this has not been the number one issue that people vote on. We're in such a polarized country, but if the polls are correct, the vast majority of Americans actually disagree with our other guests and actually want common sense laws put in, much like the Brady Bill and much like these other background checks and closing the loopholes if we can. So I think that's what he's trying to do.
Adelle, do you want to come in on this and explain to us why it is becoming such a polarizing issue? One would think that it's a no-brainer, right? Nobody is going to condone the kind of senseless violence we've seen today.
Thank you for the question. I think that there's a lack of information. I think that there's a lot of misinformation that's skewed in one direction. I know President Biden talked about taking on the gun lobby. What about the tobacco lobby? There are more tobacco-related deaths in this country annually than there are gun-related deaths, and it continues. So if we're going to apply that one-size-fits-all kind of mentality, go after everything, go after everyone. There's enough poison that can be really dealt with to go after everything. Unfortunately, the lobbies in America aren't going anywhere.
I'm so sorry for this, Adele, but I have to come in. Is that a fair comparison? If you're smoking, you're injuring yourself. If you are carrying a gun and you're upset, you could kill a lot of people much quicker than someone who has this terrible habit. I don't know if it's.
I'm playing devil's advocate
I
here.
don't know if it's the same thing. Because here you have the potential to end someone else's life because you're having a bad day versus years and years of a terrible habit. Is it the same thing?
The reason I brought it up is because of the politicization, that it's become a polarized issue where it seems like you have people who are on the right, Republicans who are protecting the Second Amendment, and those who are more on the left, Democrats who are more about changing the Second Amendment. What it comes down to is this. I'm going to say it again. America is and has been an exceptional country in the way that it was founded, right? It's very, very difficult and challenging to go in and to actually try to instill a change to the Second Amendment. It will cause a rippling effect within which it will potentially unravel the entire Constitution. Then you're going to be able to go after all these different laws, have people from the
No, I understand the politics of it. My only question is, did those 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds know about the politics or the Second Amendment or gun lobbies, and do they care, and does it matter, and is that the fair debate? Dr. Harrison, I think this is a good point in the discussion to try and explain why this law, this Second Amendment, which you explained was the backbone of allowing citizens to feel that they can defend themselves even against an oppressive regime. Is it still relevant and valid in this day and time after America has been the longest, oldest, and most stable democracy in the world?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there are a broad set of issues and debates, and that the country, many would argue, is that one of the reasons that you don't have a problem, or at least a fear of an oppressive government. And I know it seems very odd because also the U.S. military is the most powerful in the world. But as we've seen on the global scale, poorly armed people have an ability to check the advance of powerful states. And I know it's a theoretical argument. And to go back to your earlier point, I fully understand and accept that the victims of this tragedy today are not going to argue this. As I said, I'm from Connecticut. I remember what the state people in the state went through after Sandy Hook. But it doesn't mean that you throw out fundamental rights and because somebody has abused them. And I get that it's a very difficult case to make in a situation like this. And I fully understand that. And I fully understand that much of the rest of the world doesn't understand sort of that fundamental belief that many Americans have. And we can debate around the edges. But the question really becomes, at what point where is that line drawn?
All right.
And what rights are you willing to sacrifice? And it's certainly in an emotional time, it's a dangerous discussion to have.
The fact is that there is a cause and effect, isn't it? So, Ron, let me come to you then on what is the middle ground, and do you hope for any movement in this direction after this awful incident?
Yeah. I actually do not agree with both of my guests, both of your guests that you have here. I think it's the Second Amendment is a red herring here. No one is saying we need to get rid of the Second Amendment. No one. What we're saying is, do you need assault rifles in people's hands that are military style? And as your guest explained, we have states that actually have stricter laws, so it's not against the Constitution. We could do that in more states. We could have better background laws. So I think framing it in an all or nothing, either we have a constitutional amendment or not, or everything unravels, that's a red herring. That's not real. And saying that we have to defend ourselves against foreign people is also a red herring, I think, because there are things that we can do. And by the way, the majority of Republicans and Democrats in the United States agree with those things. Background checks, making sure you close the loopholes, making sure you do all these things that are sensible without getting rid of the second. And again, we've had these laws in states and federally in the past, and they've been fine. They haven't been against our Constitution. So I think it's about a will to act right now. And in fact, I think the right is politicizing it and the left is politicizing it. We need to reach a common grounds where we do common sense things to save lives. And those things are possible if we don't polarize it in the way that the discussion happened today, whether it's it's all Second Amendment or nothing. There are things we could do in between. And I think our guest mentioned it. Follow some of the models of the states that actually have more restrictive and common sense laws. Close the background checks. Make sure those loopholes are closed. Those are things we could do tomorrow. Ban assault rifles except for law enforcement or people who are highly trained and checked very carefully to have those military style assault rifles. Those are things we could do tomorrow if there was a will.
Yep. Perhaps this will move the needle and there can be a broader, more detailed debate. It is an American issue, but frankly, the story is one which has shocked people around the world. We can all feel the pain of the parents of these children, of that community, and our hearts really go out to everyone there. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the discussion. As we wrap this issue, I just want to play out for you what Senator Chris Murphy said today in America, and perhaps he's reflecting what a lot of that country feels.
There are 14 kids dead in an elementary school in Texas right now. What are we doing? What are we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African-American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing? But I'm here on this floor to beg, to literally get down on my hands and knees and beg my colleagues. Find a path forward here. Work with us to find a way to pass laws that make this less likely, shooting after shooting. What are we doing? Why are we here? What are we doing?